Thank you. That concludes general questions, and we now move to questions for the First Minister, and I call question number 1, Johann Lamont.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and may I wish everyone all the best in 2013 and ask the First Minister what engagements is planned for the rest of the day. First Minister.
Deputy Presiding Officer, with permission, I'd like to pay tribute to Jimmy Halliday, the former chairman of the Scottish National Party, who sadly passed away last Thursday. Jimmy Halliday led the SNP in the 1950s when they had 2 candidates in a general election, but in his career he laid the foundations for the expansion of the party that subsequently followed and the success that we've enjoyed more recently. His funeral is taking place in around an hour in Dundee, and although many of us can't be there in person, I'm sure that all members on these benches, and indeed across the whole chamber, will wish to send our thoughts and condolences to Jimmy's wife Olive and the wider family. Later today, I've got meetings to take forward the Government's programme for Scotland.
Johann Lamont.
Thank you very much, First Minister. And of course, we would too wish to send condolences to his family. In the first week after summer recess, the First Minister moved his Deputy Nicola Sturgeon from Health and put her in charge of the referendum and economic recovery. 4 months later, it's becoming increasingly clear why she was so keen to move on. A children's ward threatened with closure at St John's in Livingston, Borders General put at risk, surgery provision cut at Perth Royal Infirmary, the scandal of hidden waiting lists at NHS Lothian and beyond, people with terminal illnesses being denied life-prolonging drugs which are available in other parts of the country. Nicola Sturgeon proclaimed herself the Yes Minister. Can we start calling Alec Neil the Clean Up the Mess Minister?
First Minister.
Well, that's a cheery start to the new year, but as I remember it, when Nicola Sturgeon moved the Deputy First Minister, then many voices across the chamber were saying how excellent she'd been as the Health Secretary. Even Jackie Bailey, I think, moved herself to... I mean, I admit it was in contrast to what they said before, but nonetheless, that was the general tenor. So I don't accept Johann Lamont's revisionist view of Nicola Sturgeon's term as Health Secretary. I mean, let's look at some of the great successes of the Health Service. This Government has protected the frontline National Health Service budget, delivering record £11.6 billion resources, something which would not have been guaranteed if we'd had the misfortune of the Labour Party in office. We put patients and their safety first, which is why I suspect that the thing that really matters, that is public confidence and patient confidence in the National Health Service in Scotland, is at a very, very high level indeed. And I could also mention that this party seems almost to be alone in this chamber now, as I understand it, in wanting to maintain a National Health Service free at the point of need. The original... Well, as I understand, prescription charges are part of the Labour Cuts Commission. Perhaps another reason why the Scottish National Party government, on its record on the health service, is so warmly supported by the Scottish people.
Johann Lamont.
Well, perhaps the First Minister himself might not have been so fulsome in his praise of Nicola Sturgeon when she moved, if he realised now what we are hearing about what is happening in the health service. Because we know there is a real terms cut, and whatever the First Minister says about free prescription charges, we also know that it is a service under phenomenal pressure. And his denial of that is a denial of his responsibility as the First Minister of this country. Because, of course, no matter what gloss the First Minister wants to put on it, on November the 7th, the Auditor-General, Caroline Gardner, put our health service on amber warning. And when I challenged the First Minister about this, he said the National Health Service was performing in outstanding fashion. But the Audit Scotland report highlighted Nicola Sturgeon's real legacy to the health service: £1 billion repaired backlog, health boards having to borrow to keep services up and running. This is what the Auditor-General said, not what I said. And thousands of staffing cuts, leaving us with fewer nurses than when the SNP came to power. Given the new revelations on a daily basis about the mess that Nicola Sturgeon has left the Scottish Health Service in, does the First Minister still think the Auditor-General is wrong?
First Minister.
I think Johann Lamont's wrong, not the Auditor General. She's wrong in a range of ways, but in particular, I notice that she's now revised her previous claim, which she made on the 4th of September last year, that there were fewer staff in the health service when I became First Minister. That's what she said in the official report on 4th September. In fact, on June the 12th, the full-time equivalent 130,363 in the health service, compared with 127,000 in September 2006. There are actually more staff in the health service than when the SNP took office. Perhaps why she didn't seek to repeat that claim. No doubt we might get a correction at some time. But let's deal. I mean, let's just assume that Jackie Baillie, the person who said that Scotland was the centre of hospital-acquired infection, just when hospital-acquired infections were dramatically declining in Scotland. Let's assume that Jackie Baillie and others in Labour benches will be difficult to convince of the excellence of the work of the people in the National Health Service. But what really matters, is it not, in validating their work, is the satisfaction rate among the people. And that is recorded in the Scottish Household Survey, not by the Government, but the Scottish Household Survey. 88% of people were satisfied with their local health services, up from 81% in 2007. So not just a satisfaction ratio which is at a high level, but also a significantly higher level than when the SNP took office. I somehow think that the verdict of the people of Scotland is somewhat more impartial than the verdict of the Labour Party benches. After all, isn't it the verdict of the people of Scotland that has this government in office and the Labour Party in opposition?
Johann Lamont.
First of all, the First Minister says that he thinks I'm wrong. Well, I work on the assumption the First Minister thinks I'm wrong. The problem for the First Minister is the Auditor General is saying something very serious, and he is saying that is wrong. Staff across Scotland are raising concerns about the pressures they are under in the National Health Service. This is not an attack on staff who are doing a phenomenal job. The charge is that this government is not supporting them, is making that job more difficult. But it seems every week we have another damning report on the health service. In 2008, Nicola Sturgeon said that she had made tackling health inequalities her top priority. Yet the Auditor General, Caroline Gardner, told the Audit Committee on December 18th that in terms of life expectancy, the gap is still increasing. The Chief Medical Officer, Dr Harry Burns, has also acknowledged the lack of progress in tackling health inequalities under this government. Now we are told that we are having a rethink to how we approach health inequalities. Is that an admission that Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP have completely failed to deliver their top health targets?
First Minister.
Right. Health inequalities is a huge issue for the Scottish people. The reason that Harry Burns made that point, Nicola Sturgeon, I heard the comment, the SNP have done nothing. The SNP, as Harry Burns has indicated, have made the tackling of health inequalities and facing up to that situation, which incidentally has been with us for a generation and more in Scotland, one of the top priorities of government. And I could gently say to the Labour Party that a range of measures which are directed to improve the health of the Scottish people. One and only one of the most important of these is our attitude to alcohol, and in particular the attempt to introduce minimum pricing, which would have a significant effect in improving the health of the Scottish people. If the Labour Party had showed rather more enthusiasm for that, then perhaps we'd have slightly more credibility in their claims on the National Health Service. But, this chamber and all through it would do well to remember that there are certain things which, and I think the health inequalities in Scotland and our, I do hope, approach to a National Health Service free at the point of need, are things that actually should unite people across this chamber. There should be joint objectives of this chamber. And I think Nicola Sturgeon made it a key objective of government policy. We will continue to pursue it. We know the task of work that has to be done, and we know the measures. We also know that no measures are going to yield immediate short-term gains in this, but this is something which should unite the Scottish Parliament because it's something of huge importance to the Scottish people.
Johann Lamont.
The problem for the First Minister is that saying it doesn't make it so. The difficulty for the First Minister is that we understand the challenge of health inequalities. We understand the challenge of inequality across our communities. And the challenge in government, then, is to test what you do and what you spend against these outcomes. And when I said that, the First Minister said, no, we will not have that debate at all. And the fact of the matter is, Nicola Sturgeon was Health Secretary for 5 years. In the 127 days since she left, her successor has had to deal with review after review, a review into the full extent of the hidden waiting lists in health boards all across the country, when Nicola Sturgeon told us the NHS Lothian was an isolated case. A review of access to groundbreaking drugs for people with terminal illnesses, because under Nicola Sturgeon we went from being the best in the United Kingdom to the worst. And a review of health inequalities and the resuscitation of a task force 5 years after Nicola Sturgeon made it her top priority. How many reviews do we need? How many independent reports do we need before the First Minister realises that his government is failing to deliver for the health of the people of Scotland?
First Minister.
There's a range of connections. Can I just point out it was Nicola Sturgeon who established the review into waiting lists across Scotland. And of course, the fact that we are prepared to establish that review and do something about it is in sharp contrast to the Labour Party, where hidden waiting lists were institutionalised within the Labour Party policy. But perhaps the real task. Johann Lamont says that I've been saying something and doing something. We said we'd protect the health service budget, and we've done that. We have delivered in full on the manifesto commitment to pass on the Barnett consequentials arising from the UK 210 Comprehensive Spending Review, and this year, which will see a record £11.6 billion resource budget for health in Scotland in 2014-2015. Exactly what we'd said we'd do. In sharp contrast, the Labour Party wouldn't give the commitment to protect the health service budget, but in the famous Ian Gray interview in Newsnight, refusing to say that the health service budget would be ring-fenced in Scotland. We said we'd put it as a key priority of public spending in Scotland, and we have delivered that. Exactly what we said we'd do in the election, which is why this party has been trusted by the Scottish people with the National Health Service and our other vital public services in Scotland.
Question number 2, Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister when he'll next meet the Prime Minister.
First Minister.
No plans foreseeable future.
Ruth Davidson.
2 years ago, this SNP government brought in community payback orders when the Justice Secretary said criminals would be, and I quote, paying back through the sweat of their brow the harm they have done in our communities. Can the First Minister tell me how much of the work handed down in the last financial year has actually been completed, and does he think his CPO scheme is working?
First Minister.
I think we're making good progress in CPO as across the range of justice issues in Scotland. Can I gently remind Ruth Davidson, we now have crime at the lowest level in Scotland for 37 years, with just over 105,000 fewer recorded crimes reported to the police than in 2006-2007. So on the 30-year comparison, on the term of this Parliament comparison, this party is delivering on criminal justice in Scotland in sharp contrast to the Tory governments from Westminster, or indeed the Labour-Liberal coalition in Edinburgh. Ruth
Davidson.
So, Deputy Presiding Officer, that's a no, he can't tell me about his own scheme. But I can tell him, and I'll use his own figures. In 2011-12, more than 10,000 community payback orders were handed out, of which 7,763 involved actual work. Of those, only 2,536 were completed. That's less than a third. And even worse, of over 2,500 work requirements officially terminated last year, a third were signed off uncompleted, so the work will never get done. Last week, a sheriff raised concerns that criminals are turning up, being marked down for 2 hours' work without lifting a finger. Sheriff Graham Buchanan Sheriff Graham Buchanan thinks the public would be horrified if they knew how these so-called robust community sentences were being administered. So there's a massive backlog, whole sentences are signed off only partially completed, and offenders are credited with work they never do. Communities are being conned and not paid back. Is that why on Monday this Scottish Government advertised for an outside body to evaluate whether CPOs are working at all?
First Minister.
We evaluate policies because we welcome that sort of independent scrutiny of the success of the policies. Independent scrutiny is something I welcome, and in particular today is an excellent day to be saying that, since I've been cleared yet again of the nefarious charges which have been made by the opposition parties in this chamber. But can I say that we look outside body or not in terms of justice very carefully at the success of the policies, and therefore perhaps it would be helpful to Ruth Davidson if I could point out that the reconviction rate in Scotland has just dropped to its lowest level of each of the last 13 years. Well, it's particularly important because the Community Pay Pact order is part of an approach which focuses on disposals being effective, which reduce re-offending. And of course, not only are we intent on making these disposals effective, not only are we subjecting all policies to scrutiny, but given that we've got 1,000 more police and more in the streets and communities around Scotland, this is the worst time in recent history to be a criminal in Scotland, and the best time in recent history to be a member of public with fear of crime falling in Scotland for the first time in many, many years.
Supplementary question from Liz Smith.
First Minister, last week NHS Tayside did actually make a reduction in the provision of emergency cover surgery at Perth Royal Infirmary, and that comes on top of reductions that we've seen in paediatrics and maternity services over the last few years. Does the Scottish Government support these reductions in an area which includes many rural communities that is set to see very substantial population growth in the years ahead?
First Minister.
Well, the Health Secretary will be delighted to address directly the question in NHS Tayside. We are intent on securing high standards of care in Perth, across Tayside and indeed across Scotland.
Brief supplementary. Kevin Stewart. Order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the First Minister what support the Government can offer the staff of the Foyer Restaurant and Gallery who are to be made redundant following the decision, the very sad decision, to close this well-thought-of social enterprise?
First Minister.
Well, the Government will extend the normal impact and pay schemes and try to help the people in that situation. I'm familiar, of course, with the Foyer Restaurant and Gallery. I've been there a number of times. The Government have indicated record levels of support for social enterprise in Scotland, and we would encourage all people, including local authorities, to extend the same level of support.
Question number 3, Linda Fabiani. Could we have Linda Fabiani's microphone, please?
I've not switched on. Thank you. To ask the First Minister what the impact of changes to child benefit will be on families in Scotland.
First Minister.
Well, the UK Government's attack on the previously universal child benefit is expected to affect 91,000 households in Scotland, who will lose £1,400 per year on average. Of these households, 60,000 are expected to lose their entire child benefit payments, and 31,000 will see their payments reduced.
Linda Fabiani.
The First Minister will be aware that the vast majority of Scottish MPs voted against this attack on child benefits at Westminster. Would he agree with me that this is further proof that this Parliament should be the one that has the responsibility for welfare to protect Scotland from further Tory cuts?
First Minister.
Well, of course, the Labour and the SNP voted in the same lobby in the House of Commons on Tuesday, because there was a recognition that the range of changes will actually affect 1 million households in Scotland who will lose substantially. That includes many, many working households in Scotland who will lose huge sums of money as a result of the policies of the Tory and Liberal administration at Westminster. And I think that unity of purpose in defending people at this time of great economic trouble is to be applauded. I'd have to say that it would have been an extra vote if the leader of the No campaign in Scotland hadn't been going about the country stirring up antipathy instead of doing his duty. Alistair Darling should have been in the House of Commons voting with his Labour and SNP colleagues.
Question number 4, Rob Gibson.
To ask the First Minister how the recent report by Pinsent Masons, Scotland's place in the renewable energy world, aids Scotland's sustainable growth. First Minister.
Well, a clean and green energy supply based on renewables is a key part of a strategy for sustainable economic growth. I welcome the fact that 84% of respondents to this survey said Scotland is the most attractive place across these islands to invest in renewables. Pinsent Masons said, and I quote, "Scotland's renewable energy market is upbeat about its prospects for success in 2013 and beyond." It goes on to say there is every reason for confidence, and so say all of us.
Rob Gibson.
I thank the First Minister for his answer. I note that Pinsent Masons' report also highlights Scotland's international reputation as a leader in renewables. Does the First Minister agree that this is a very encouraging fact that we seek to attract further investment to Scotland as a result to create clean energy jobs from the Mull of Galloway all the way to Muckleflugga?
First Minister.
Yeah, I agree with that, and there has to be a contrast between this government and often it has to be said this Parliament's encouragement and enthusiastic support for renewables and the somewhat mixed messages that are emanating from the Department of Economy, Energy and Climate Change in London. And I welcome the report, and I particularly looked at the section which highlights the international reputation. It says Scotland is recognised as an important contributor to the development of renewable energy markets globally. It is indeed viewed separately from the UK as a clear place in the hearts and minds of many investors.
Question number 5, Jenny Marra.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's position is on the assertion by the Chief Constable of the Police Service of Scotland that a change in legislation is required to properly define the roles and responsibilities of the service's HR and finance functions.
First Minister.
Well, in terms of legislation, the respective roles of the police authority and police services are set out in the 2012 Act, which is widely supported across the Chamber, are actually based on these which have been in place and have worked well for more than 40 years. But I think the key operational point surely is that the Chief Constable and Chair of the SPA are due to meet on Friday next week, that's the 18th of January, with a view to reaching agreement on corporate functions. And I know that everybody in the Chamber, including Jenny Marra, will look forward to seeing that agreement, hopefully, a week on Friday.
Jenny Marra.
Officer, we will look forward to the conclusion of that meeting, but we were looking forward to a conclusion before Christmas time, as the Justice Secretary promised us, because the Justice Secretary said on the 5th of December there is no remaining contention about what the legislation says about respective roles. The First Minister himself before Christmas dismissed this as creative tension between the two men. However, this was wishful thinking at that time and remains so today. Isn't it true that the Cabinet Secretary for Justice has stood back and let a beast with two heads emerge as both camps duplicate HR, finance and other functions? The Cabinet Secretary is not in control of this situation. What will the First Minister do now to ensure that this power struggle is sorted out immediately?
First Minister.
Obviously, I was overestimating Jenny Marra's goodwill and enthusiasm for the reconciliation of the dispute. Can I just say that the proposed structures are intended to be free from duplication and overlap. But can I also point out, just to correct her memory, it was actually before Christmas in a letter to the Justice Committee on the 20th of December that the Chair of the SPA confirmed that good progress had been made and he hopes for a formal agreement on corporate functions to be reached at the SPA's next meeting on the 18th of January. That was what was said before Christmas. And I do think, despite Jenny Marra's remarks, that there is a substantial body of agreement across parties that look forward to that meeting and hopefully that agreement on corporate functions.
Supplementary, Sandra White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am sure the First Minister welcomes the genuine interest from the member on ensuring that the new Scottish Police Service is a great success. However, does he also agree with me that we need to focus on and highlight the substantial progress and success which have already been achieved since last summer, which, amongst others, has, only the other day, seen the establishment of National Road Patrol, something which I am sure we will all want to welcome as a way to make Scotland's roads safer?
First Minister.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point, because it's important. Well, it is a fair point. It's because it's important to focus on the very, very substantial range of issues which have been introduced that are ready to go, rather than just focus on a disagreement which hopefully is near its reconciliation. I also should say to Sandra White and to the Chamber that the new police service of Scotland will have 17,454 officers starting. That's the 30th of September this year, last year's figure, which is, if I remember correctly, it was something that the Labour Party forecast it would take us 13 years to deliver that commitment. It seems that that commitment, like many commitments, has been delivered rather early.
Supplementary, Alison McInnes.
Thank you very much. I have here the application pack for the appointment of the Chief Constable, and I quote, "The overall purpose of the post is to establish and lead the police service of Scotland. The post holder will provide inspirational leadership, including the direction and control of over 17,000 police officers and 6,500 police staff. Were the applicants misled? Is the legislation flawed? First Minister, what went wrong?"
First Minister.
I know that job prospects for Liberal Democrats are poor these days. I'd had no idea that Alan McInnes had offered herself for the task. I know that Alice McInnes and the people across the Chamber are genuinely looking forward to the meeting a week tomorrow and a reconciliation of this so we can go forward with the new National Police Service in Scotland. I have to say something, of course, which would have been up to the Liberal Democrats would never have been brought into being at all. So I have to advise, given that Alice McInnes was dead against having a National Police Service in Scotland, it's probably not true that she had the application form to put herself forward.
Question number 6, Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the recent CNN poll that places Scotland as the #1 tourist destination for 2013.
First Minister.
Well, I heard some disgruntlement in the Tory benches about a strong good news story for the Scottish visitor and tourist industry. I think the fact that one of the major broadcasters in the world put Scotland forward as the #1 tourist destination for this year generally will be felt across Scotland to be something of a success and an accolade for our visitor industry. Only in the ranks of Better Together could they possibly find anything in that accolade from CNN to be disgruntled about. I suggest that most people in Scotland will say, well done CNN for making such a wise choice and putting Scotland top of the list.
Claire Adamson.
The First Minister will be aware that North and South Lanarkshire councils have come together for this year in celebrating Lanarkshire 2013, which will include events surrounding the bicentenary of David Livingstone. What boost to this campaign does the First Minister expect will result from the CNN poll rating?
First Minister.
Well, I think it's a very substantial point, because I think the David Livingstone bicentenary is a very, very important aspect and celebration that I was visiting recently, the exhibition in the National Museum of Scotland, which I would commend to people in Scotland to attend. Last year I had the pleasure of launching the Scottish National Trail with Cameron McNeish. And that trail, of course, was cited by CNN as a key reason for people to come to Scotland this year. This is the year of Natural Scotland, and I'm delighted, therefore, to announce an additional £2.9 million as part of the Shovel Ready Capital Project programme to improve visitor facilities at the Cairngorm and Loch Lomond and Trossach National Parks. Scotland's national parks are already hugely popular, and I know this extra funding will boost their appeal as tourist destinations and help us encourage ever more people to come to our beautiful country.
Supplementary from Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of the 12% drop in tourism numbers this summer, which is very worrying now that we're into the winning years. What steps is he taking to stop this dramatic decline?
First Minister.
Well, there was actually a 12% increase in overseas tourism expenditure over the period. There was a 2% decrease in domestic expenditure, that's domestic in terms of GB tourism visits, where there was a 3% decrease. But, you know, and I think that most analysis of these figures, particularly given the increase in spending, would say it was an exceptionally good performance, particularly in international tourism, when a year which many people suspected that international tourists might be diverted elsewhere because of the understandable concentration on the London Olympics. So I don't share Rhoda Grant's pessimism about these figures. I think they're very good figures in these circumstances, and I know that she will join me in welcoming the CNN accolade as further evidence that Scotland will achieve even more in international tourism in the years to come.
That concludes the First Minister's questions, and I will allow a short pause to let members who are not participating in the next debate to leave the chamber quickly and quietly, and also for the public gallery to clear before we move to members' business.